Case Lázaro Barbosa, the fear that walked through the woods. Take a deep breath before continuing. Because the story you're about to hear isn't just about a man on the run. It's about silence. The kind of fear that grows when day breaks and no one knows whether they'll make it home at night. It's about how a single person managed to bring entire cities to a standstill without saying a single word. For 20 days, Brazil followed, almost without blinking, one of the largest manhunts in its recent history. One man, one name, and a trail of terror that seemed to have no end. His name was Lázaro Barbosa, and before everything you've already heard, before the headlines, the helicopters, the dogs, the drones, and the gunfire, there's a question that was never fully answered. How does someone get to that point? In early June 2021, the rural region between the federal district and the state of Goiás seemed to be living ordinary days. Simple farms, hardworking families, houses spaced far apart where the silence of night usually means peace. But that dawn, silence meant danger. On a small farm in Incra 9 in Ceilândia, an entire family had its routine abruptly interrupted. What happened there wasn't just a crime. It was the beginning of a domino effect that would change the lives of thousands of people. When the sun rose, Brazil woke up to a piece of news that was hard to swallow. 3 members of the same family had lost their lives inside their own home. The mother had disappeared. And the most frightening part, the person responsible wasn't under arrest, wasn't officially identified, and already seemed to be far away. At that moment, no one imagined that this was only the beginning. As the hours passed, police began to put the pieces together. Fingerprints, old records, a name already known to authorities, but still unknown to the country. Lázaro Barbosa didn't come out of nowhere. He already carried a long criminal record, marked by escapes, repeat offenses, and clear signs that something was deeply wrong. But the system failed, more than once. And now, that failure was loose, moving through the woods. As the search began, something even more distressing took hold of the local population. No one knew where he was. Lázaro didn't flee like someone in panic. He moved with strategy. He knew trails, streams, steep terrain. He knew how to disappear. Residents started sleeping with the lights on. Others abandoned their homes. Farmers released their animals and left everything behind. Fear was no longer a feeling. It was a permanent state. And then came the reports. Homes invaded. Families held hostage. People forced to remain in absolute silence while he ate, rested, and moved on. There was no logical pattern. In some places, he passed through without harming anyone. In others, the outcome was devastating. And that made everything even more terrifying. Because when there's no logic, there's no prediction. And when there's no prediction, no one is safe. Meanwhile, the manhunt grew. Police forces from different states joined in. Helicopters flew over rural areas. Thermal drones scanned the woods at dawn. Tracking dogs followed trails that suddenly vanished, as if he had turned into smoke. But Lázaro always seemed one step ahead, and the country watched day after day with a mix of tension, curiosity, and disbelief. How could someone escape for so long? To understand that, we need to go back in time. Long before the manhunt, long before the collective fear. Back to Lázaro Barbosa's childhood. Born in the countryside of, Lázaro grew up learning a cruel lesson early on. Survival came before everything else. Still a child, he would hide in the woods to escape abuse at home. What seemed like just a detail from the past would later become a deadly skill. There, in the middle of dense vegetation, he learned how to move silently, to observe, to wait. Without anyone noticing, the woods became a refuge, and later, a weapon. In adolescence, the first signs of deviation began to appear. Conflicts, serious accusations, behavior that frightened those around him. But once again, nothing was stopped in time. The first serious crime came while he was still young. Then another. Arrests. Psychological reports pointing to emotional instability, impulsivity, and deep distortions. And even so, benefits were granted. Sentences were softened. New escapes followed. Every time the system opened a gap, Lázaro slipped through it. Until one day, he didn't come back. When June 2021 arrived, Lázaro was no longer just a fugitive. He was a man shaped by violence, impunity, and his own ability to disappear. And now he was free, walking among simple homes, watching ordinary families, choosing where to stop and when to move on. The manhunt was just beginning, and Brazil had no idea how far it would go. In the next part, you'll understand how the escape turned into a national nightmare, how fear spread like dry fire, and why, with each passing day, the question stopped being "where is he?" and became "who will be next?" The problem with a long escape isn't just that the criminal remains free. It's what happens to everyone on the outside. With each passing day, the manhunt stopped being just a police operation and became a collective psychological phenomenon. Fear began to spread faster than any patrol car. In Ceilândia, Cocalzinho, Águas Lindas, Edilândia, people stopped going out at night. Some stopped going to work. Others slept with their phones in hand, waiting for an alert that might not come in time, because no one knew where he was, but everyone knew he was nearby. The name that had once been unknown now echoed everywhere: Lázaro Barbosa. In the first nights after the crime at Incra 9, reports emerged that completely changed the tone of the search. Lázaro wasn't just fleeing, he was moving. Homes were found ransacked, food consumed, clothes changed, personal items left behind. It was as if someone had passed through without asking permission. And the most disturbing part, in many cases the families were inside those homes when he arrived. Accounts described the same scene: an armed man, calm, speaking softly, demanding absolute silence. No shouting, no running. The terror came precisely from the calmness. Some victims said he seemed comfortable, as if that wasn't a moment of escape, but of control. He ate, he talked, he watched television, and then he simply left, without explanation, without apparent logic. This unpredictability paralyzed the region, because how do you react to someone who, in one place, hurts no one, and in another, leaves a family destroyed? With each new report, police had to expand the perimeter. More officers, more resources, more pressure. And still, Lázaro escaped. Authorities began to admit something uncomfortable. He knew that region better than any map. Invisible trails, shortcuts through the woods, shallow rivers that erased tracks, steep terrain that slowed vehicles. While dozens of officers moved in formation, he moved alone. And that made all the difference. Media coverage intensified. Helicopters broadcast live images. Reporters spoke with terrified residents. Experts tried to explain what seemed inexplicable. But behind the scenes, something even more serious emerged. Lázaro should have been in prison long ago. Records showed a sequence of arrests followed by escapes. Psychological reports warned of a high risk of reoffending. Even so, benefits had been granted. Every bad decision in the past was now exacting its price. And the ones paying weren't the system. They were ordinary people. Meanwhile, disturbing information surfaced. Lázaro was following the news. He knew what was being said about him. He knew where police were focusing their efforts. He knew when the net was tightening. At one point, it was discovered that he used social media. He followed police pages. He watched live broadcasts. It was a manhunt in which the hunted was also watching. And that created a dangerous psychological game. And left first. But now, for a few seconds, the roles almost reversed. Even so, Lázaro escaped once again, and fear returned even stronger. As the days passed, residents began abandoning entire properties. Animals were left loose. Crops were abandoned. The region entered a state of permanent alert, and a question began to circulate in hushed voices, almost like a collective whisper. How is this still not over? The answer was harsh and simple. Because Lázaro wasn't just running, he was surviving. Every invasion gave him food. Every change of clothes confused trackers. Every night in the woods gave him an advantage. And the net, despite being massive, had flaws. Poor communication, areas without signal, conflicting information, At times, police couldn't even communicate with each other, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Lázaro's family appeared publicly. His mother made an emotional appeal for him to turn himself in. His father apologized to the victims' families, but nothing seemed to have any effect. Lázaro kept moving forward, as if he had already accepted his own fate and was willing to go all the way. In the public's mind, time began to distort. Every night felt longer. Every noise in the woods felt like a threat. Every unfamiliar car caused panic. Fear stopped being rational. It became instinct, and it was in this climate, when many already believed he would never be captured, that the manhunt entered its most tense phase. Because the tracks began to draw closer, the net began to tighten, and for the first time, Lázaro seemed cornered. But when a man has nowhere left to run, he becomes even more dangerous. In the next part, you'll hear about the final days of the manhunt, the mistakes, the successes, and the moment when everything reached its limit. At some point in the manhunt, something changed. It wasn't announced publicly. It didn't appear in headlines, but those who were there felt it. The tracks began to repeat. Tips started pointing to the same region, and for the first time in nearly 20 days, police weren't chasing the past. They were closing in on the present. Lázaro Barbosa was still free, but he was no longer comfortable. Teams began to reduce the perimeter. What had once been an almost infinite search area became concentrated in specific regions of dense forest, near waterways, steep terrain, and abandoned farms. And that wasn't a coincidence. Police had understood the pattern. Lázaro moved like someone thinking several steps ahead, but at the same time he repeated strategies that had worked before. And repetition leaves tracks. Tracking dogs once again indicated the same points. Thermal drones began picking up unusual movement at dawn. Residents' reports started to converge. It was as if the woods were slowly closing in around him. But that didn't mean safety. Quite the opposite. When a man accustomed to running realizes he's being surrounded, two things can happen. Either he surrenders, or he decides to go to the limit. And Lázaro was never someone who chose the easy path. On one of the last nights, residents heard gunshots. Brief exchanges of fire, confused. It was the clearest sign yet that the final confrontation was approaching. But once again, he escaped. Wounded, exhausted, maybe, but still alive, still moving. And that increased the tension among the teams, because now it wasn't just a manhunt, it was a race against time. Officers began working with virtually no rest. Long shifts, sleepless nights, constant psychological pressure. Any mistake could cost someone their life. And there was another silent factor weighing on everyone. The entire country was watching. Every step was analyzed, every decision criticized, every delay questioned. But in the woods, there were no cameras, no applause, only risk. Meanwhile, on the other side, Lázaro began showing clear signs of wear. Abandoned objects more frequently, less strategic movements, tracks left in places where he had once been careful. The body was demanding its price. Days of poor sleep, limited food, untreated injuries. Nature, which had been an ally for so long, was beginning to turn into an enemy. The final encirclement happened quietly. No fanfare, no announcement. Teams advanced slowly through a dense area of forest, following precise indications from dogs and drones. Every step was calculated. Every snapped branch sounded too loud, because everyone knew, if he noticed the approach, he could react. And reacting meant maximum risk. When contact finally happened, there was no room for negotiation. The confrontation was fast, intense, and final. After nearly 20 days on the run, Lázaro Barbosa was located. And there, in that stretch of woods that had served as a hideout for weeks, the manhunt came to an end. The man who had brought entire cities to a halt, who had made a country sleep on alert, would not flee again. The news spread in minutes. Helicopters returned to the sky, but now with a different tone. Reporters announced the outcome. Authorities confirmed it. For many, it was immediate relief. For others, a shock that was hard to process. Because despite the fear, there was something almost surreal about it all. As if a collective nightmare had ended, but left marks far too deep to simply disappear. In the affected cities, silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was a heavy silence, loaded with memories, with stories that wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. Families that would never be the same. Residents who began locking doors even during the day. Children who learned far too early what it means to be afraid. And then came the inevitable question. After everything ended, what was left? What was left were the failures. A system that ignored reports. That granted benefits without structure. That allowed repeated escapes. What was left was the sense that it could have been prevented. And, above all, the warning. Because Lázaro didn't come out of nowhere. He was built over time. By negligence, by indifference, by accumulated bad decisions. Telling this story isn't about glorifying terror. It's about remembering the human cost of omission. It's about remembering that behind every headline, there were ordinary people trying to survive something they never asked to live through. And it's about remembering that fear, when ignored, grows. If you've made it this far, here's an invitation to reflect. Stories like this don't exist just to shock. They exist to warn, to question, to prevent repetition. If this content made you think, leave a like. It really helps the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next cases. And if you want to keep reflecting on real stories that marked Brazil, there's a recommended video appearing on your screen now. See you there. Take care. When the news was confirmed, there was no celebration. There was silence.
A strange silence, heavy, almost suspicious. As if the entire country was waiting for someone to say, "It's really true. It's over." Because for nearly 20 days, fear taught a cruel lesson. Not to trust quick endings. In the cities that lived through the manhunt up close, no one went out into the streets to celebrate.
Doors stayed closed, windows locked, and many people only believed it after seeing the sun rise more than once. Some residents reported something curious. Even knowing everything was over, their bodies still reacted as if danger were still there. Noises in the woods, footsteps in the distance, car headlights at night. Fear didn't leave with the news. It stayed. The families directly affected never had an ending. For them, there was no closure, no complete relief. What existed was emptiness. Because when violence enters someone's life like that, it doesn't leave when the person responsible ceases to exist. It changes places. It moves into memory, into interrupted dreams, into unanswered questions. As days passed, media attention faded, cameras left, helicopters disappeared from the sky, reporters moved on to other cases. But for those who lived there, life never returned to normal. Some families sold their properties, others abandoned rural life entirely. Some never slept in their own homes again. And no one talked much about it, because there's a part of trauma that doesn't fit into an interview. Then came the analyses. Experts, authorities, committees, all trying to answer the same question. How was this possible? The answer wasn't simple, but it wasn't unknown either. Old psychological reports resurfaced. Documents warning of high risk, a history of violence, impulsivity, and repeat offenses. Repeated escapes came to light, benefits granted without real monitoring, lack of structure, lack of integration between states. The system didn't fail once, it failed many times, and each failure pushed the problem forward until it exploded. The case exposed something uncomfortable. This wasn't unpredictability. It was dealing with someone predictably dangerous who had been ignored repeatedly. And that realization caused discomfort. Because it's easier to believe that certain people are born evil than to accept that bad decisions build tragedies. Another rarely discussed point was the impact on the police themselves. Many officers spent days sleeping poorly, living under constant tension, working under extreme conditions. Some reported anxiety attacks after the operation ended. Others took temporary leave from work. But that rarely becomes a headline. Because when everything ends, society wants to turn the page too quickly. Over time, the name Lázaro began to disappear from daily conversation. But something remained, an uncomfortable sense of vulnerability. The perception that no matter how many resources exist, the system can still fail. And when it fails, those who pay aren't the decision makers, they're the ones in the way. Many people ask themselves, what if he had been captured earlier? What if the warnings had been taken seriously? These questions don't change the past, but they should shape the future. Because ignoring them is accepting that everything can happen again. There's an important detail in this story. Collective fear didn't arise only from the crimes. It arose from the duration. 20 days is enough time for panic to organize itself, for imagination to create shapes, for danger to feel omnipresent. That's what turned a criminal into a symbol of terror, not through brilliance, but through persistence and failures around him. Today, when this case is remembered, it's often summed up in a few words: the biggest manhunt in recent history. But that phrase erases what matters most. It erases sleepless nights. It erases frightened children. It erases families who never return to the same place. It erases the human cost. Telling this story isn't about reliving terror. It's about preventing selective forgetting. Because when a country forgets too quickly, it prepares itself to repeat. The questions that remained didn't disappear. When everything officially ends, that's when the hardest questions begin. A lot was left without clear explanation. Did he act alone the entire time? Some victims claimed they saw only one man. Others reported movements and presences difficult to define. Doubt never fully disappeared. Another question still echoes. How did he stay on the move for so long? It wasn't just endurance, it was logistics. Constant access to food, clothing changes, information. Suspicions of indirect support arose. Nothing definitively proven. But the hypothesis itself already revealed investigative limits. There's also the issue of accumulated failures before the manhunt. Old reports pointed to risk. The history of violence was extensive. Previous escapes showed a pattern. Even so, decisions were made as if the risk were acceptable. It wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a sequence. And when mistakes accumulate, they stop being accidents and become consequences. He didn't come out of nowhere. He was shaped by environment, neglect, and repeated releases without monitoring. None of this justifies the crimes, but it helps explain how they became possible. For nearly 20 days, an entire region lived in constant alert. That leaves marks: anxiety, chronic fear, permanent distrust. These effects rarely appear in statistics, but they remain. And there's a silent question few ask. What if it had lasted longer? The country was lucky the outcome came when it did, and relying on luck is not a public safety strategy. Over time, the case was absorbed into the news cycle, but the structure that allowed it remained almost the same. Stories like this aren't exceptions, they're warnings. Warnings ignored turn into repetition. When the dust settles, the deeper truth appears. Stories like this reflect accumulated choices, silences, and the habit of reacting too late. The case was more than a manhunt. It was a mirror showing how warnings are handled, how reports are ignored, and how problems are pushed forward until they explode. If this story impacted you, don't let it end here. Remembering is what prevents cycles from repeating. Thank you for listening until the end. Take care. And remember, the real danger begins when we stop paying attention. If this story caused you any discomfort, don't ignore it. Leave a like now. It helps this video reach more people. Subscribe to the channel, because there are stories that must not be forgotten. And watch the next video that's appearing on your screen. Silence protects those who do wrong. Information protects those who have no voice.